Palestine in the late Ottoman period, the international scene. Ever since the middle of the 19th century, there began a decline in the power of the Ottoman Empire. This empire had ruled Palestine since the 16th century, in fact, since 1517. This rule was about to come to an end, and with it came the involvement of European powers in the affairs of Palestine. Throughout the time of the Ottoman rule, European powers wanted to have some sort of involvement in what they regarded as the Holy Land for Christianity. We all remember the time of the Crusaders, but also after the Ottoman rule began in Palestine, there was all the time European involvement in the affairs of the country. This involvement became far more intensive in the late 19th century, especially after the Crimean War of the 1850s. The War of the Crimeans was about the Balkans, but the trigger for the war between Turkey and Russia in many ways, about the future of the Balkans, the trigger was the rights of the Russian Empire to interfere in the affairs of the Christians in Palestine. The European powers began to have consulates in Palestine, and through all kinds of international agreements with the Ottoman Empire, began to have special rights in the land of Palestine. These new rights included the right to purchase land, to grant citizenship to minorities, or at least some sort of diplomatic protection. And for our story of the Israel-Palestine conflict, it's important to remember these new achievements by the European powers, because the Zionist movement would exploit the permits that European powers had to purchase land and to give foreign citizenship for the implementation of their idea and vision of the colonization of Palestine. When Britain occupied Egypt in 1882, it became far more interested in the future of Palestine than ever before, because now it had a physical base inside the Middle East. And from 1882 onwards, the British Empire becomes the main European empire that is interested in Palestine as a future colony or a future possession. Its main rival in Europe was France. And in 1912, the British and the French began to a set of negotiations in which they agreed more or less of how they would divide the Arab world should there be a war with the Ottoman Empire, and they would win the war and divide the spoils between them. It was very clear that Britain wanted Palestine to be part of its new empire in the Middle East. Britain made different promises to different people about Palestine in the years leading to the First World War and during the First World War. Its first promise was to the Hashemites in the Hijaz, the family of the Sharif Hussein, in order to induce him to join their war efforts against the Turkish Empire in the First World War. The Sharif Hussein was promised part of the Arab world, which, according to one interpretation, included Palestine, in a famous correspondence the Sharif had with the High Commissioner of Egypt, Sir Henry McMahon, in 1915 and 1916. So that was one promise. The second promise was made to the French in the Sykes-Picot Agreement in May 1916, when Britain suggested to France that they would jointly rule Palestine because of the sacredness of the country to Christianity. And then came a special promise that contradicted the two other promises on the 2nd of November 1917 to the Zionist movement, the Balfour Declaration. Arthur Balfour was the Foreign Secretary of the British government, and he wrote a letter to the leader of the Anglo-Jewish community, Lord Rothschild, in which he said that Britain would promises to create a homeland for the Jews in Palestine, and also promised that this homeland would not contradict the aspirations and interests of the other people who lived in Palestine. So we had three different promises by Britain for the future of Palestine should it occupy Palestine and make it part of the British Empire. One to the Arabs, one to the French, and one to the Zionist movement. When Britain occupied Palestine, the only promise it had kept was to the Zionist movement, and it did not fulfill the other two promises.